Leave! Both of you! The words hit the room like shattered glass. 4-year-old Ava stood motionless in the center of the hallway, clutching a tiny silver locket she had discovered near the staircase. She didn't understand why the adults suddenly looked frightened. Her mother, Elena, felt her stomach twist. For years, she had worked inside this mansion without drawing attention to herself. She cleaned, organized, and stayed invisible. Every sacrifice she made had one purpose: giving her daughter a safer future. Now it seemed that future was slipping away. Sawai. Woman standing before them folded her arms. "I've tolerated this long enough," she said. "This is not a place for children. Pack your things and leave before tonight." The hallway went silent. The staff exchanged nervous glances. Nobody dared speak. Ava looked up at her mother, confused by the tension she could feel but not understand. Elena forced herself to remain calm. "Please," she said softly. "She's just a child." The response came instantly. "That's not my concern." The woman turned away as though the conversation were already over. But it wasn't, because at that exact moment, a sound echoed from above. Footsteps, measured, deliberate, powerful. Every person in the hallway looked toward the bar staircase. A tall man appeared at the top step, the owner of the state. A man whose business empire stretched across continents. A man who rarely raised his voice because he never needed to. And judging by the expression on his face, he had heard everything. The atmosphere changed immediately. The woman who had been issuing orders moments earlier suddenly looked uncertain. The billionaire descended, one step at a time. His face revealed nothing, no anger, no shock, no emotion at all. Yet, somehow that was even more unsettling. When he reached the bottom of the staircase, he didn't look at his fiancée. He didn't address the staff. Instead, he walked directly toward the little girl. Ava tightened her grip on the silver locket. The man crouched until they were eye level. "What do you have there?" he asked gently. The child opened her hand. "A treasure." A faint smile touched his lips. "May I see it?" She nodded. He examined the small silver object carefully before returning it. "It is a treasure." Ava's eyes brightened. For the first time since the shouting started, she smiled. The billionaire stood and finally turned toward the woman who had demanded they leave. His voice remained calm. "Elena and her daughter are staying." The woman stared at him. "What?" "They are staying." The words were simple, final. The kind of words that left no room for argument. The staff members looked at one another in disbelief. Nobody had ever heard him contradict his fiancée in public. Not once. But what happened next surprised them even more, because instead of defending himself, he looked directly at Elena. There was something unusual in his expression, something troubled, something deeply personal. "Can we talk?" he asked. Elena's face drained of color. For a second, she couldn't breathe, because she knew exactly why he was asking. A secret she had protected for 4 years was about to come to light. And once the truth was spoken aloud, nothing would ever be the same again. Years earlier, before private jets, magazine covers, and billion-dollar acquisitions, Marcus Reed had been just another ambitious entrepreneur trying to keep a struggling company alive. Back then, he worked impossible hours. He slept in offices. He survived on coffee and determination. Success was still a dream. That was when he met Elena. Not at a glamorous party, not through wealthy friends. They met during a city fundraiser where she worked as event staff. A spilled drink, an awkward apology, a conversation that lasted much longer than either expected. For several months, they saw each other whenever their schedules allowed. There were no promises, no dramatic declarations, just two people who felt unexpectedly comfortable together. Then everything changed. Marcus's company exploded almost overnight. Investors arrived. Travel became constant. His life accelerated beyond control. Meanwhile, Elena discovered she was pregnant, terrified but hopeful. She tried to contact him again and again and again. No response, unknown to her. Every message had been intercepted by an executive assistant determined to protect Marcus from what she considered distractions. By the time the truth emerged, years had passed. Elena convinced herself he had chosen silence, so she built a life alone. A difficult life, but a stable one. Then fate played its strange game when she accepted a housekeeping position at a luxury estate years later. She had no idea who owned it. She learned the truth on her first day. Marcus Reed, the father of her daughter. She almost quit. Instead, she stayed silent for 4 years, and now, standing in the hallway, she realized the silence had finally reached its end. Marcus led Elena into his private study and quietly closed the door behind them. For several seconds, neither spoke. The room felt smaller than usual. Outside the tall windows, rain tapped softly against the glass. Inside, years of unanswered questions hung between them. Marcus finally broke the silence. "Is Ava my daughter?" There was no anger in his voice, no accusation, only uncertainty. Elena lowered her eyes. Moment she had spent years avoiding had finally arrived. "Yes," she whispered. Marcus stared at her, even though part of him had already suspected the truth. Hearing it spoken aloud felt different. Real. Permanent. His hand tightened around the edge of the desk. "Why didn't you tell me?" A tear slid down Elena's cheek. "I tried." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "I called. I left messages. I sent letters to your office." Confusion flashed across his face. "I never got any of them." "I know that. Now," the words carried, "years of pain. But back then, I thought you ignored me." Silence returned. Marcus slowly sat down. Every memory from those years replayed inside his mind. The endless meetings, the travel, the assistant who had managed every call and message, the employee he had, eventually fired after discovering several professional mistakes. Could she have hidden something this important? The possibility made him feel sick. Across the room, Elena wiped her tears. "I stopped trying after a while." Marcus looked up. "And then? I learned how to survive." Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Marcus asked the question he feared most. "Have I missed everything?" Elena's expression softened. "Almost everything." The answer hit harder than any accusation. First steps. First. Words, birthdays, bedtime stories, moments he could never get back. He closed his eyes. For years he had believed success was measured by numbers, profit, growth achievements. Now, none of those things seemed important, because somewhere in the world his daughter had grown up without him, and he had never even known she existed. Meanwhile, upstairs, Victoria sat alone in the master bedroom. The confrontation in the hallway replayed endlessly in her mind. At first she felt angry, then embarrassed, then something else. Entirely fear. Not fear of Elena, not fear of losing the mansion, fear of losing the future she had imagined. For months she had been planning a wedding, a life, a family. Now everything felt uncertain. She walked toward the mirror and stared at her reflection. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to admit something she had hidden from everyone, even from Marcus, especially from Marcus. 8 months earlier, doctors had delivered news she still struggled to accept. Having children might be extremely difficult, possibly impossible. She had carried that burden alone. She never told Marcus because she feared what it might change. Now a child had appeared in his life unexpectedly. Child who shared his smile, his eyes, his blood, and suddenly every insecurity she had buried came rushing to the surface. Hours later, Marcus found her sitting quietly near the fireplace. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Victoria looked up. "She's really yours, isn't she?" Marcus nodded. The answer hurt. Not because it was cruel, because it was true, Victoria. Laughed softly, the kind of laugh people make when they are trying not to cry. What a mess. Marcus sat beside, or neither knew what came next. For the first time, there were no business strategies, no solutions, no plans, only honesty, and honesty can be uncomfortable. Victoria stared into the fire. I owe you the truth. Marcus turned toward her. Then she told him everything, the doctor's visits, the test results, the fear she had been carrying, future she worried she might never have. When she finished, tears filled her eyes. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finally stopped speaking, neither of them felt angry anymore. Only sad. Sad for all the conversations they should have had months ago. Sad for all the silence that had grown between them. Sometimes, relationships don't break because people stop loving each other. Sometimes they break because people stop sharing their fears. Over the next 2 weeks, everything changed. Not quickly, not dramatically, slowly, carefully. Marcus spent more time with Ava. At first, she was shy around him. She would hide behind Elena whenever he entered a room. But children notice effort. And Marcus kept showing up day after day. He ate breakfast with her, read bedtime stories, helped her build towers from colorful blocks, listened to endless stories about imaginary animals. One afternoon, she handed him a crayon drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. That's you, she said. Marcus looked at the picture. His throat tightened. Who's the middle one? Ava giggled. Me? He smiled. And who's this? Mommy. The little girl pointed proudly. Marcus stared at the drawing long after she ran away to play. It was probably worth less than $1, yet it became the most valuable thing he owned, because no award, no trophy, no business achievement had ever made him feel what that drawing did. For the first time in years, Marcus wasn't thinking about the future. The following month felt different from anything Marcus had experienced before. For years, his days had been measured by meetings, deadlines, and quarterly reports. Now they were measured by smaller things: morning pancakes, bedtime stories, tiny footsteps racing down hallways. And somehow, those moments felt more important than every business deal he had ever signed. Ava was beginning to trust him. Not because he was wealthy, not because he owned the estate, because he kept showing up every day without fail. One Saturday morning, Marcus found her sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by crayons and paper. She was concentrating so hard that she didn't notice him enter. "What are we working on?" he asked. Ava looked up. "I'm making a map." "A map?" She nodded seriously. "To find treasure." Marcus smiled. "That sounds important." "It is." She pointed to a scribbled yellow circle. "That's the treasure." "And where is it hidden?" Ava lowered her voice, dramatically. "Somewhere nobody looks." The words made Marcus pause. Somewhere nobody looks. Strange how wisdom sometimes arrives from the smallest people. For years he had searched for success in places everyone told him to look: money, recognition, power. Meanwhile, the greatest treasure in his life had been standing quietly in the background, waiting. That afternoon, he helped Ava search the entire house for imaginary treasure. Behind curtains, under tables, inside empty cabinets. By evening, both were exhausted and laughing. Elena watched from the kitchen doorway a month earlier. She never would have believed this scene was possible. Marcus wasn't trying to make up for lost years with expensive gifts. He was doing something far more meaningful. He was becoming present. One evening after dinner, Ava climbed onto the couch beside him, carrying her favorite stuffed rabbit. The toy was old and worn from years of being loved. One ear drooped, lower than the other. Marcus had seen her carry it everywhere. What happened to him? he asked. Ava hugged the rabbit tightly. He's old. What's his name? Biscuit, Marcus laughed. Biscuit. She nodded. He protects me. The answer was so sincere that Marcus couldn't help smiling. Then Ava asked a question. One simple question. Yet it stopped him completely. Are you staying? Marcus looked at her. What do you mean? She stared at the rabbit. A lot of people. Leave. The room became very quiet. Children notice more than adults. Realize. They remember absences. They remember disappointments, even when nobody explains. Them. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. He moved. Closer, I'm staying. Ava looked up. For real? For real? She studied him carefully, as if deciding whether she believed him. Finally, she nodded. Then she leaned against his shoulder. A small gesture, but one that meant everything. Across the room, Elena quickly looked away. She didn't want either of them to see the tears in her eyes. Weeks passed. Spring began replacing winter. The gardens, surrounding the estate, slowly filled with color. Life settled into a rhythm, a comfortable rhythm. One afternoon, Marcus received an invitation to speak at a major business conference. A year earlier, he would have accepted immediately, without hesitation. Instead, he looked at the date, then at the note attached to the family calendar on his desk. Ava's school performance. Same day, same time. For several minutes, he stared at both schedules. Then he picked up the phone. His assistant answered. Would you like me to confirm attendance? Marcus smiled. No. A brief silence followed. The conference? Cancel it. The assistant sounded surprised. It's one of the largest events this year. No. Marcus looked toward a photograph sitting nearby. A picture Elena had taken of him and Ava in the garden. The little girl was laughing so hard her eyes were closed. Marcus couldn't stop smiling. Either. There are more important things. The day of the school performance arrived. Parents filled the auditorium. Children peeked nervously from behind. Curtains. Teachers rushed around trying to keep everything organized. Ava stood backstage wearing a handmade costume decorated with paper. Stars, she looked terrified. Elena crouched beside her. You'll do great, Ava shook her head. What if I forget? You won't. What if I do? Before Elena could answer, another voice spoke. Then you'll be exactly like every adult on Earth. Ava turned. Marcus had arrived, wearing a suit because he had come directly from work. He crouched beside her. You know a secret? What? Everyone gets scared. Ava blinked. Even you? Marcus laughed. Especially me. That answer seemed to surprise her. She thought for a moment. Then she smiled. Minutes later, Ava walked onto the stage. The spotlight found her. For 1 second, she froze. Marcus could see panic in her eyes. Then she looked into the audience and found him. Smiled, gave her a small thumbs up. The sigh. Same simple gesture he had used every night before. Bedtime. Something changed. Ava took a breath and began. Her voice was tiny, but steady. By the end of the performance, the audience erupted into applause. Ava's face lit up. She spotted Marcus again, and this time she didn't hesitate. She ran straight toward him the moment the show ended. Without thinking, she threw her arms around his neck. The hug lasted only a few seconds, but for Marcus, time seemed to stop, because it wasn't forced, it wasn't encouraged, it wasn't expected. It was chosen, completely, freely, a child's trust, the most valuable thing in the world. That night, after Ava fell asleep, Marcus sat alone on the back patio. The estate was quiet. Stars filled the sky. Above, Elena stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to him. Neither spoke immediately. Sometimes, silence feels comfortable when it's shared with the right person. Finally, Elena smiled. She had a good day. Marcus nodded. The best. They watched the stars together. For a while, neither mentioned the past, the mistakes, the lost years, the pain, because for the first time, those things no longer felt like the entire story. They were only chapters, not the ending, and neither of them realized it yet. But the most important moment was still ahead. A moment so small that most people would have missed it. A moment that would quietly heal a wound years in the making. A moment that would finally transform 3 separate lives into one family.